With us this week is Rick Gould. He was introduced to us by one of our previous guests who spoke about NASA. He represented NASA and I think he was a research pilot.
Mhm.
And he suggested that we bring on at least one of his coworkers to the show. And so Rick shared his interest in participating, which was pretty awesome. And so, Rick, here's our situation. Here's how we work. We don't really introduce you. You introduce yourself and use your why or your elevator pitch. And for the next 30 minutes, this is your show. So if you want to break it up and allow questions to come in, go ahead and do that. Or if you just want to just share your awesomeness and
Okay.
wait for questions at the end, that's on you too. But we want to welcome you to Pathways to Aviation. It's amazing having you here, and we're excited to learn all about you.
Thank you. Well, first off, I'm also a teacher, and I've been a teacher or instructor in some capacity for better part of my adult life, either formally or informally. So if you have questions, please ask questions. I don't mind questions, off the wall questions, normal questions. You guys know the old saying, there are no stupid questions. So please do not be afraid to ask. So I'll start with the why, because originally when I talked to Mr. Parker here, I was expecting to do the why portion. And I'm a huge fan of Simon Sinek. And if you know who Simon Sinek is, he's all about knowing your why. And I see a couple people nodding and smiling. So some of you are familiar with him. My why, now I can look back and figure out what was my why. But, many years ago when I got started on my career path, I knew what it was if somebody had asked me, but it was never put in those kind of terms. But for me, my why is I just plain love flying. I love anything to do with aviation. I've worked on airplanes. I have, flown and operated aircraft. I have done a number of background jobs that are seemingly menial and sitting at a desk and at a computer. And the cool thing is regardless of whether it was running around on the flight deck of an aircraft carrier, trying to not get burned up, chopped up, run over, blown over, and thrown over, or under something, but the hazard was always in something, under something, or over something, I would say. It was something that I always loved, and it was absolutely a difficult job. I traded working on airplanes after about 10 years for actually flying them. And here's a little, one of those little career morsels that I get to throw out because I've, exceeded the half mark of the century in age, i.e. I'm over 50. So yeah, you never know when you're having that conversation with somebody. For those of us that are a little bit older than others, we never know when we're having that conversation with somebody that can change their life, literally. I remember the conversation I had, and I remember the man's name that I had it with. And I was probably all of 18, maybe 19 years old. I wanted to be a pilot. Now I'm already in the military, but I wanted to be a pilot, and I wanted to figure out how I could become a pilot. But the problem was at the time you had to have perfect eyesight, which I didn't. And at the time you couldn't get corrective eye surgery. Now you can. So I remember a guy that was probably only a few years older than me, but in the military, you're always mentoring somebody and you're always being mentored. So you're always in the middle. There's somebody under you or that's not as far down that road as you that you're giving advice to and you're helping. And then there's the person that's further down the road than you that's helping you and giving you advice. So you're always intake and outlet. It's information coming in and then providing information out. I remember that conversation. The man's name was Dave Gove, and my wife and I have talked about this. I'm on a mission to try to hunt him down so that I can thank him, and I hope someday I get to shake his hand, because I remember the conversation. I said, I want to be a pilot, but I have bad eyes. And he looked at me and he says, you should become a flight engineer. And I go, what's that? Well, a flight engineer, without going into the details, because there's not the easiest way I can explain it is a flight engineer is the child of a pilot and a mechanic. If you were to take everything that a pilot does and everything that a mechanic does, you would draw a line right between the two of those, and that's what I do. So I'm actually on the flight deck. I'm in the cockpit of the aircraft with two pilots flying an airplane, and that's what I've done for the last half of my Navy career. I retired for a while. Very long story short, I fell out of aviation, not because I wanted to, but because I kind of had to, and I had to reinvent myself. And I kept, I was always that guy. If an airplane's flying overhead, I have to look up at it. I still do that. That's what I do for a living. And I still have to look up at an airplane that flies over me. It doesn't matter whether it's a big airplane, a small airplane. That's just the way I'm wired. And here's one of my favorite Rickisms. Aviation is a disease. You will die with it, just don't die from it. And it gets in your blood, and it's nearly impossible to get out. So I found that way back, and how I got there, it's probably a longer story than what we have time for. But if it brings value and you have a question and you're honestly curious, feel free, I'll expound on that. So that man, Dave Gove, that one conversation, he probably doesn't even remember it. I'll bet you 10 to 1. If I ever track him down, I'm able to talk to him. I'll bet you 10 to 1. He does not remember it. And so for those of us that are a little bit older, we have to remind ourselves when we're having those conversations with people and we don't recognize that moment when we are changing somebody's life. I'm able to look back retrospectively and I think, thank God I had that conversation with him, because I don't know where things would have gone. Maybe I eventually would have wound up here. I don't know. But I have absolutely no regrets. I absolutely loved my job. I loved being a flight engineer while I was in the Navy. It was a very, very difficult job. I was the first one there, the last one to go. I'm the guy that's outside in the rain and the cold and the heat. I'm either sweaty or I'm freezing or it's windy. I'm sometimes having to de-ice the airplane and my feet are soaking wet from de-icing fluid and slush all around me. So there was a side of it that was just gritty and tough and brutal, but I relished that part. And then I transformed from the guy that's outside, dealing, having to be tough and deal with the environment and the weather, to going inside and then getting into checklists and getting the aircraft prepared for taking off and doing takeoff performance calculations, all kinds of different things to estimate how is the airplane going to take off, how's it going to climb, how are we going to cruise, and how are we going to land. And then in flight, my job often, I'm sitting here looking like this. And while my pilots are often the stick actuators, as flight engineers sometimes like to refer to them, they're flying the airplane, but it is a team effort. And I will tell you, that is what I love about the job. Back to the why. I love being part of a team. And even at my last job, which was not in aviation, I loved the aspects of being part of a team and part of a family. And I left on good terms. It was a relatively small company that grew a lot while I was there. And I was able to bring my background from the aviation industry into writing their instructor guides and writing curriculum. And then oddly enough, what do I do now when I'm not flying? I'm writing flight operations manuals. So I took the skills, even though I wasn't in aviation, I took that skill set that I was learning and developing and learning how to be a technical writer in something that wasn't even aviation related. And I've taken that skill set and applied it to exactly what I'm doing now. So my normal job is I'm often flying on the airplane, but I don't fly every day. So if I'm not flying, my job is actually working on writing flight operations manuals. Now, some people that may seem kind of boring, but I actually enjoy it. I even enjoy that boring aspect of it. And I don't quite know how to explain it, but I finally figured out another one of my whys years ago. And this why I figured out actually with a conversation with my mom. About 25 years ago or so, I became a CPR instructor. Again, told you, worn a lot of instructing and teaching hats. I became a CPR instructor for my squadron. And along with that, they said, do you want to go to EMT school? I'm like, EMT, emergency medical technician? Okay, sure. I'm an aircraft mechanic at the time. I don't fix people. But they were willing to give me some training. I thought, hey, sounds neat, sounds like something exciting, sounds like something else to learn. So absolutely, I did it, loved it. And I'm explaining to my mom, and finally it hit me, and I realized, Mom, now I know why I like it. I'm just fixing people before I fixed airplanes. And that why has evolved over the years. And that same why on why do I love writing instructor manuals, instructor guides, and rewriting curriculum and writing the flight operations manuals that I'm doing now is I find passion and drive in fixing things, in taking something that's broken and making it work. Whether it's a car, an airplane, a wind turbine, or an instructor guide or a flight operations manual, that's to me, that is something that actually drives me and I find very fulfilling. And not to mention which, you know, all our flight manuals now are on something like this. It's an iPad. So yes, we've gotten technologically savvy now. And one of our flight manuals is 1,800 pages long. So it's a little hard to carry 1,800. Sorry, I had a call coming in on, am I still there? Did I lose you guys? Uh-oh. Oh, there we go. Sorry, I had a phone come in. My headphones were connected to my phone and somebody tried to call me. Apologize for that. So, you know, one of our flight operations manuals is 1,800 pages long. I don't know about you, but I don't want to carry an 1,800 page book with me. So yeah, we do everything electronically. And there is definitely satisfaction in looking at that checklist and being able to start with seeing where can it be better, making it better, and then handing it back off to everybody else and saying, hey, look, you know, there's my work right there. So for me, I probably have a lot of whys. And I'm not sure I'll ever run out of them. I can say that I've only grown my whys, and they've never, if anything, I've added whys, but I don't think I've ever lost a why. There's nothing that I can think of in my life that I was passionate about once that I got to the point I was like, yeah, I'm just not into that anymore. But, you know, that's me. Everybody else, everybody's different. And, you know, sometimes we have very clear paths. I was talking with these gentlemen right before we got started. And back when I was in high school, I knew I wanted to be in aviation. I knew I wanted to do something with airplanes, and I knew that I wanted to go to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. But nowadays, I've noticed with some of the younger generations, they don't always know this is what I want to do. If you guys are here and you're part of this group, chances are you're not falling into that group. Maybe you haven't figured out which path. But one of the things I will tell you is you're rarely ever constricted to one path. If you go down one path and you decide, you know what, I either don't like this, or in the case of what I did, I was down that being an aircraft mechanic path, and I loved it. I still love it. I still love tinkering on airplanes. And given the choice, I'd rather work on airplanes than cars any day of the week. But at a certain point, I was presented with the opportunity to go, ooh, that looks really cool. I want to do that. And so I jumped onto that other path, and, you know, I still enjoy that. And that's what I do now. I still do that. When it comes to, I'm going to touch on something that's close to the elevator pitch, but it also ties into interviewing. And one of the things that that my boss, who hired me and hires most of the pilots that are in the office where I work, is he has a very keen way of selecting people and choosing people. And one of the things is passion. and you have to find passion in what you're doing. There's a story of a pilot who didn't get the offer because during the interview, she was talking about her management and her leadership, and she was wing commander and squadron commander and all these things that had to do with the leadership aspects of her job in the Air Force, which is great. But he's trying to explain that the job is for what we call a line pilot. Your job is to fly. That's pretty much it. You have some other things along the way, but your job is to be a pilot. We're not in our positions to climb the ranks and eventually go from this level to this level to this level. Chances are when I retire at some point in the future, I'm probably still going to be a flight engineer. I'm probably not going to have any other fancy title. I don't care. That doesn't bother me. And I clearly communicated in that interview how much I enjoy flying. And I don't even know how to describe it, but those, people that are career pilots and people that find that passion and that interest and go that path, you know it and you understand it. There's just something about the art of flying that I find fascinating. Now, I will go from a Boeing 747 SP, which is the normal aircraft that I fly, which is a smaller version of the larger Boeing 747s that are out there now flying commercial airlines. And then I will trade that in for a glider. And that's one of the passions I also have is I go out to the glider port here and I'm working on my glider rating. And I find both of those opposite ends of the spectrum. Boeing 747 glider, no engine, weighs less than the APU on the auxiliary power unit on the Boeing 747. See, I explained that terminology. I didn't just spit out APU, right? So he's smiling. And that was one of the points that Mr. Parker was making earlier. You have to be very careful with the terminology. You don't want to lose the person you're talking to unless you're absolutely sure they understand that terminology. So I can go from that Boeing 747 to that glider, and I find equal passion with both of those. They're very different, obviously, but that art of flying is what I absolutely gravitate to. And even though the flights that we're on, they're 8, 9, 10 hours, they can be kind of boring. I don't know how to describe it, but I can sit there at 43,000 feet or whatever altitude we're at the point of that mission, and it's dark out because we fly at night because it's an aircraft that carries a telescope, and so our mission is astronomy. And we have a 14-ton telescope in the back with a big door that opens up. And the mission directors tell us, fly this heading, and we'll fly that heading for 100 miles, couple hundred miles, or 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, whatever it might be that they need to be able to look at whatever it is they're looking in the sky. And it's not terribly exciting. I'm okay with that. I still enjoy the environment of sitting there looking at this instrument panel in front of me, listening to the radios, listening to air traffic control. You have to be aware of the reality of the job. And that was another thing that they were very clear in asking me in the interview. And I think is something that's very important when you're looking at a career field. Often I have people asking me about going into the Navy, and I just repeat the success that my recruiter did for me. He didn't lie. He didn't sugarcoat it, and he didn't tell me it's going to be great and you're going to be doing this and that. He gave me the dirty, nasty, not so fun side, and he told me, and I basically just changed it up and gave it my own wording. But I tell people now, don't judge the military by your first 2 years, because you're at the bottom of the heap, and yeah, it sucks, and it sucks to be at the bottom of the food chain, but give it a couple of years, you rise up that food chain, and next thing you know, you start to feel empowered. You start to feel like, hey, now I'm somebody. I'm in charge of people, and now I'm mentoring and teaching other people, and that's when you start to have that feel good about what you do. But one of the things about the mission is those long, drawn out, boring portions of the flight that not everybody will tell you about. But I did this for 11 years of my 21 years. I flew what a lot of people might consider very long, boring flights. And so I made sure I communicated that very clearly to the gentlemen that were interviewing me, saying, I've done this. I know what I'm getting myself into. And, you know, with NASA, you'll sometimes hear people talk about the honeymoon phase. And that honeymoon phase is that you go through a certain period of, ooh, gee whiz, I work for NASA now. And yeah, it sounds fun. It sounds amazing when you say it. And sometimes I have to look down at the what we call the meatball on my shirt and go, how did I get here? And you know, I'm still maybe in that honeymoon phase. I may never get out of that honeymoon phase. But I wanted to make sure that I very clearly communicated that I understand what I'm getting myself into. And this is what I did for years, and I'm passionate about it. It's my why. It's what I want to do. And so I've been able to I've been able to completely just jump in to what I used to do. That was my absolute passion. And to back up a minute and tell you guys, you know, I spent a number of years outside of aviation. And one of the hardest things I had to do was tell my boss, when I had the opportunity to go fly for NASA, I had to tell him, I'm moving on. And I felt like such a heel. I really did. I felt there was part of me that felt like I was letting them down. The CEO looked at me and he says, is it something that you're absolutely passionate about? I said, yes. And he says, then I can't fault you. I would do the same thing. He knew I enjoyed what I did, but you know, I just happened to be presented with that thing that was that much better. So I parted on good terms. I didn't burn bridges. And since I've left, I have actually spoken very highly of that company and that organization. I've gone back to visit because I want to see how they're doing, because I put a number of years of my life into them. And so here I am in that realm of passion. I've been with NASA only a short time compared to a lot of the people I work with, you know, just over a year. As life would serve up certain elements of humor, my first day on the job, I went to work like a little kid that was excited to start high school. And I had a big old smile on my face, and my wife's taking pictures of me like she's sending off her son the first day of school. That's what it felt like. And I get to work. This was March 16th of last year. Want to guess what happened on March 17th of last year? NASA shut down due to COVID-19. So I finally get my dream job, and I couldn't even go to work. But, you know, they kept me on. Fortunately, it wasn't the kind of thing where they were, well, sorry, we've got a pandemic, we're going to throw you back into the pool. So, you know, I kept working. I studied from home with my nose in the books. One of the other pieces of advice that I often give, aviation is an interesting industry in that it's not an industry that attracts nor facilitates passivity. And what I mean by that is it exemplifies one of the criteria that I was graded on for promotion while I was in the military. One of those items was initiative. And in aviation, it seems to be an industry that gravitates to drawing people in that have initiative, that have drive, that have the, I see something that needs to get done and I'm going to jump up and do it. Particularly where I'm at now, you know, NASA being the organization that it is, it comes with a lot of curb appeal for a lot of people. And so they have the advantage of kind of being picky, and they tend to have a number of people that can apply for a position, and they get to basically decide who do they want. One of the things that was made very clear to me before my interview was what they're looking for is not necessarily on one's resume. Your resume gets you the interview, but that's not what gets you the job. What gets you the job is far, at least here. And I can tell you, like I said, my boss, he's excellent about picking people. When I look around, the people I work with are absolutely the most amazing group of people I've worked with. They have resumes that are this long, and they have egos that are that long. And I find this crazy inverse relationship between their experience and their credentials and their egos. They are the most humble, down to earth people. That was one of the key things that was told to me for the interview. Be humble. I heard that several times. Shortly after NASA shut down and I'm working from home and I'm feeling like, okay, this is weird. I'm working from home. Nobody's watching me. My boss doesn't call me every day. He hardly even tells me, I need you to do this, this, and this. And so roughly a month into the job, studying from home, just have my nose in the books, self-studying, since he didn't really give me a lot of strong direction to go in to say, I need you to do this, this, and this. I'm talking to him on the phone one day. I said, well, Tim, since you didn't tell me a direction to go in, because, if you told me to go in a direction, I'd go in that direction. But since you didn't give me a direction, I'm just going in this direction. And he goes, that's why I hired you. I'll never forget that comment. And if my point's not clear, I'll try to be very clear. The point was I was not sitting around with this passive mindset of waiting for somebody to tell me what to do. I took the initiative to go, okay, I know that I need to start looking at this, this, and this. If I have a question and I'm not sure, absolutely, I can call him, I can text him, I can email him and say, hey, Tim, what should I do? Should I do this or this? But when I look around, there's a term called micromanagement that very often is, it's the kind of thing that is detrimental to, I think, any organization. And I've been a part of organizations where there's a lot of it, and I've been a part of organizations where there's none of it. Sometimes even part of organizations where there could actually be a little bit more even, because sometimes you need direction from your chain of command or your leadership to tell you what to do. But where I'm at, it's, again, these people, they're humble. Nobody sits and waits to be told something. You're hired with the assumption that you've got a brain, you know how to use it. We're not going to hold your hand and tell you, you need to do this, this, and this. If you have questions, by all means ask. I have not had one encounter with anybody that I work with where I have received a negative or demeaning or a caustic response. I read checklists on the flight deck, and one of my pilots, I use this as an example all the time. One of the pilots I flew with the other day, I just had that aha moment where I just kind of sat there and smiled. He was an Air Force test pilot. He flew U-2 spy planes, was a U-2 spy plane instructor, flew the F-117 stealth fighter, and then now he's a research and test pilot for NASA. Again, his resume is huge. He has bragging rights from here to there, but he's not so full of himself or not so egotistical or not so self-centered that when I get done reading a checklist, he says, thank you, Rick. That's the kind of, and that's a culture. That's a culture that is started who knows when. But again, my boss, Tim, he's one of those guys that keeps fostering that culture. He keeps feeding that culture. He hires people that embrace and understand that culture. Another example is somebody who didn't get the job. They missed out on their job offer before the interview. Now, how do you lose the job offer or the chance at the job offer before the interview? Well, when you get taken out to dinner the night before, you're being interviewed. And two pieces of advice that I often give people is you're always networking and you're always interviewing. This individual lost the opportunity for the job offer because they were rude to the waiter or the waitress. They were kind of short and a little bit demanding for something as menial as, you got my order wrong. Well, again, my boss is the kind of person who's thinking, well, how are they going to be on the flight deck when something goes wrong on the flight deck? Are they going to start being short and caustic with somebody on the flight deck? Because one of the things that is absolutely critical if you ever go down the path of wanting to fly airplanes is something called crew resource management. We'll abbreviate it CRM. And what that is, that's a fancy term that I'm going to describe very quickly and say it's how the three of us work together as a team. And it's not necessarily about who's in charge and who's above the other person. It's about how do we communicate with each other. That little sign of how that person is talking to the waiter or waitress who, whatever, brought the wrong dish or screwed up, whatever, made a human mistake for the order. If this prospective pilot can't talk to somebody who's just bringing food to them without possibly causing them to shut down, then how can that work on a flight deck where if they exhibit that same behavior on the flight deck, another pilot or a flight engineer or a mission director or somebody else on the crew can suddenly do that, and you wind up shutting down. And when you start to shut down, that is absolutely dangerous. One of my backgrounds is aviation safety. I got a minor from Embry-Riddle saying, I've read every which way people figured out a way to kill themselves with airplanes. And I'm telling you, it is a factor in a surprising number of aircraft accidents. And so that little quality right there, that little characteristic, a savvy person who's interviewing can sniff that out. And that same thing can get tied into your elevator pitch. That same behavior should work itself into that elevator pitch and be cognizant of how you're coming across during your elevator pitch as well. My elevator pitch, like I was saying, I wish I knew this stuff a long time ago. And this is a fantastic, just nice boom, 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 boom. Here are the different points to make. And I hope that I'm elaborating on what Mr. Parker was trying to present to all of you. My elevator pitch, I've practiced it and rehearsed it over the years. And just like he was explaining, it's evolved. It changes from one person to another person, one setting to another setting. But for me, I'm going to circle back to you're always interviewing and you're always networking. The reason why I have this job is because of right now, Sophia's chief pilot is a guy that was a Navy pilot. You know where this is going. I've known Andy for over 20 or coming up on 20 years now. And he sent me a message one day saying, hey, NASA's looking to hire a full-time flight engineer for Sophia if you're interested. So whatever disposition I had, whatever person I was 20 years ago, and I like to think I'm a better version now than I was then, because we all hopefully are getting better and improving at our existence on this planet. So whatever I was back then, at least I was good enough that he was willing to say, hey, are you interested? And he was the one that gave me the advice over and over, be humble. He gave me, he told me some things, to be prepared for the interview. And, when he talked about the honeymoon phase, he also said, there's no one reason. I know that it wasn't my experience that got the job, because I know that they must have interviewed some other flight engineers that had more experience. And even if not more experience, at least recent experience. Remember, I had been out of aviation for a number of years. So my flight engineer experience was definitely not the major factor on me getting this job. It tied into a lot of things. It tied into that personality. You've got to be somebody that can be stuck in a flight deck with 2 other people for 10 hours at a time. We don't get breaks. I mean, we get to get up and walk around and stretch, but we don't fly with relief pilots and relief flight engineers. So the 3 of us that sit in our respective seats when we take off, all 3 of us are still sitting in those very same seats when that aircraft lands. And so you have to have that personality be a critical element of, that position. Now, again, this is all from flight operations and being part of flight crew. If you're interested in maintenance, I can tell you, work in maintenance. Somebody asked me the other day, I was talking with a friend of mine who was talking about somebody that works the night shift. And I don't know why, but they love to work the night shift. I said, I love to work the night shift. And they looked at me funny, as why? And I said, because everybody's closer on the night shift. You don't have the noise level of the leadership and the chain of command and all the other things that are going on. And you tend to have a really core group of people. And I've said for years, I'll rather do the worst job with the best people than the best job with the worst people. And I mean that absolutely wholeheartedly. I got lucky, and everything that apparently I've done over the years paid off, and I wound up getting the best job with the best people. I'm not sure where we're at with time, but does anybody have any questions? If nothing else, is a good pause point.
Yes, I have a question. So hi, Rick. It was so nice to hear everything you said. I could feel all your passion, and I was just getting it, and I just loved it, and I could resonate with everything you said. And actually, I have, I guess, so many things to tell you and so many things to share with you, because I'm sure we met at some point somewhere in Tehachapi, because I lived in for a few months because I was training for my glider ratings 2 years ago, and I am now a glider pilot. So when you were talking about art of flying, I was like, I am a glider pilot, so I know about the art of flying. And then you said you were also a glider pilot, so it was very funny. And what I wanted to say is that I want to work for you and for you all, and work for the NASA team, because it sounds everything I want. And my ultimate goal is to, I always said I wanted to be a flight test pilot or test engineer, flight test engineer. And yeah, in a few years, hopefully I can join the Air Force as a fighter pilot. I want to fly fighters. And but anyway, I don't want to talk too long, because I'm sure that others also have maybe questions, but I just wanted to say hi, and to ask you basically if I can work with you. And I would love if we could set up a small meeting sometime when you have some time next week or anytime, because I would love to talk with you more, ask you more questions. I don't want to talk too long. So Pete, I just wanted to say that I am in Oshkosh, so hi from Oshkosh. Maybe Rick, you've heard about that too, about the AirVenture and EAA, and it's getting very good here, very exciting. And also, by the way, I was born in France, so I have a French accent. And I am now a US permanent resident, and I live in America with my husband, who is in the military. He's in the Air Force, and he works on the C-17s. So I would have more questions for you, but I don't want to talk for 20 minutes now. So yeah, it was amazing, Rick, and thank you so much for everything you said. And I'm looking forward to connecting with you.
Well, I'm getting ready to go to French Polynesia in a couple of weeks. So one of the languages I have not really had a chance to work on was my French, but I did work on German while I was in Germany.
That's great. Well, I speak French. I mean, I could help you with some words. Yeah. So yeah. And I'm sure also we know we know some people in common, and you can say hi from me to all the people basically like at the glider port in Tehachapi,
yes,
because well, they know me, and also in Mojave. In Mojave Desert, I've been flying around and with a few different people. And anyway, so I'm sure we know some people in common, and I'm looking forward to just talk a bit more.
Tehachapi is a small town, there's not a doubt.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we can work through Pete to try to connect to figure out a time.
Yeah, I'll make that happen. I'll do like an email introduction to the two of you, and you guys can establish a relationship that way. Rick, we are out of time for sure. So this has been amazing. If anybody else wants to ask questions or connect to Rick offline, just send them to me and we'll make that happen right away. That way